I think has been in some shape or form on a lot of people's minds for a long time. Motorsport and open wheel has been the world that I've lived in, but I think that this is true broadly across top tier motorsports, the places that forever have been mainstream and sort of as such rather heavily regulated. Comparing, let's say, F1, IndyCar, NASCAR, sports car racing, like throw all that stuff in the same bucket. And then, you've got, Pikes Peak and Bonneville and things that are the complete opposite of that, being something else. But among these mainstream things, I think from my perspective, it's just an objective fact that they have stagnated in terms of what they are, basically, for something like 20 years now, basically, like for kind of a long time. And that there are some reasons, I think, why that has occurred, which is part of what I want to put forth through this project.
Right.
Like, I think regardless of whether you read this and see these pictures and agree with this point of view, I do think that there's fundamentally we have to, in our sport, acknowledge the fact that we are not doing the same thing that we were in certainly in like the 60s and 70s, let alone in like the 90s. Let's say we kind of take the 90s into the early 2000s as what a lot of us think of as kind of the last great heyday of, American motorsports, maybe broadly, where it just had that kind of natural look and feel that made you not have to think too hard about why you were tuning in, and so there's a lot in some ways, there's a lot to try to unpack basically through this project. It is ultimately the sort of manifestation of all of that is here's just a radically different way of doing this now, basically, which is the vehicle model and kind of the essence of that. But
well, hang on. So just go back to the beginning then, and you talk about stagnation now.
Yeah.
So let's sort of like define, what that is and what you want to sort of move on from. I mean, in terms of, I know we've got it where, IndyCar has been sort of iterations around the same car since 2012. We've got it where, F1 cars are getting bigger, ever more unwieldy and sort of like, again, iterations around a point. But just what to not put too fine a point on it, what is wrong with top tier open wheel racing at the moment?
Well, and I don't, for me, honestly, I don't look at it as like right and wrong even kind of. It's just like what's happening.
Yeah.
And for me, a big part of it is, and again, I think this is across the board. It's not just in open wheel racing. I think open wheel racing maybe is among the places that it's most obvious or something, or it's most front and center. You talk about, IndyCar has been using literally the same chassis for, a decade plus now. That's a pretty explicit example of stagnation, right? But I think in my mind, this starts something like mid 90s. For NASCAR, it was actually much earlier than that. It was late 80s, early 90s. The fastest lap around Daytona was Bill Elliott in like 1987 or 8 or 9 or something like that, pre-1990, 211. They have not gone faster than that ever since. There are other places where they've allowed the cars to build up speed and then they knock them back down. The reality of it is certainly today's car is not setting any track records anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, just going back to that, there was a pretty fundamental reason for them getting paranoid about the speed. When Bobby Allison basically takes down most of the fencing at Talladega, 200 miles an hour in insurance policies, basically.
Yeah. So again, like I'm not saying any of this to say the wrong choices have been made about these things or something. But I think it's important that we at least, again, just acknowledge the fact that for quite some period of time, I think for open wheel, you'd say it's more late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
You've got kind of the early 2000s kart era. You've got the early 2000s F1, V10 era.
Yeah.
For all intents and purposes, those cars, if you just threw modern tires at them and fuels and whatever, are as fast as today's cars are of the same variety. I mean, you're talking about, that era of F1 car, even they're still on grooved slicks.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah.
come on, like there's lap time available here that, maybe didn't exist back then. By doing nothing from like a technical point of view, like no major advancement of any time, just tweaking what they had available to them. That from, so pick a category, pick a year, pick a particular time, whatever, but somewhere over like a 10-year span, most of mainstream motorsport got to a point that we have not yet really, so for 20 plus years now, 25 years or something, we've not really figured out. I don't think we're fundamentally grappling with that particularly well. Like, I don't think there is an acknowledgement of the fact. I personally, really as a fan, I think that, and this may not be true. This may just be the, sort of the perception. Their perception of it, your feeling about it or whatever. But I almost feel like we've migrated into a space where the championships are almost trying to pull a veil over the thing to kind of make it look and feel like this is still about the outright pursuit of speed.
Right. Yeah.
When it's just not. Like, fundamentally, that is not the case. That's not what we're doing.
But should it be?
Well, and I guess where I think the distinction is there is, I don't think at a mainstream level that it can be, because of the things that you mentioned. That you've got insurance policies, you've got all this stuff. So there's reasons why it hasn't been that way. And I think those are constraints that I would be happy to accept as gospel. Like, these are just things that we're going to have to, whether it should or shouldn't or whatever, if the reality of it is there's going to be an insurance issue and there is fundamentally a safety issue associated with going too fast in some particular way at some particular track. And for different tracks and different sanctioning bodies and whatever, those things are sort of different, but they all basically amount to the same stuff, which is, the energy that you can crash in a corner basically is like the thing that dictates all of that stuff.
So for speed squared nonsense.
For IndyCar, that's, manifests itself in a certain way on ovals that's different from how it does on a street course. Maybe Formula One, it's a little bit more uniform in terms of the tracks they go to and probably what that boundary, is or whatever. But without going too deep in to nitpick all of that, I think to zoom out for a second, my perception of the sport, of the way that the rules have been continued to be designed in the sport, is that it is not about the outright pursuit of speed. We are not just allowing for this thing to be about the outright pursuit of speed, but we have kind of allowed, I think this is true as much about motorsports as it is for like a million things about our daily life over the last 10 or 20 years or something. We've allowed this creep of tech and kind of a way of all of the things that were coming in the late 90s, but were not totally, refined and precise and well sorted. In this case, kind of like Aero.
Yep.
We've just allowed for that to continue to be this dominating factor in the way the cars look, the way the cars behave, the way the cars do things. And I think honestly, for a lack of really standing back, recognizing that this is happening, and kind of just taking stock, that's become this overpowering force all throughout the sport. Basically. That the easiest thing to do to keep the insurance company happy is, well, just turn the engines down and the cars will just go slower. Basically, right?